Hello, I'm Ed Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, a former pastor turned atheist and now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. You're free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. And I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and get your notification bell set the way you want it so you get new content as released. I also encourage you to share my videos and give them away and whatever you want to do. I'm at the point in this business where I'm trying to build a channel, so that's also very good. And you're always free to comment as well in the bottom. Ask me stuff and things like that. Comments, of course, today is a Friday video and it's week 20. I haven't done much this week with this channel. I do apologize for that, but I am busy wrestling with something I hope will give me more options as far as what to record and how to record it. Basically, I'm working with OBS Studio at the moment, and this is recorded on that. I'm just really trying to learn how it works. Thankfully, it has one redeeming quality for me, which is it's free, and so that's kind of the issue for me. So it's not completely intuitive, so I've had to kind of work at it, which is fine with me. I don't mind learning new things. But that's kind of one of the announcements I'm giving you right now is that we're dealing with, in dealing with this, I'm trying to create different ways to do things. For instance, if I could do Life of Christ, say, with a PowerPoint outline up in the corner, that might be helpful. I want to go to 3 videos a week. I think one of the better ways to use that time is maybe to react to preachers. As a former preacher and as somebody with some biblical theological training, critiquing sermons actually is something I used to do. I'm still very interested in public speaking and training people in public speaking, so that may be something that I can do as well. But also just to examine the content of whether or not a preacher actually has good evidence to say what he has to say. And oftentimes you'll find that they don't. So that's kind of where I'm headed with that. Just giving me some options so that I can give you, when I say, look at this image, I can actually have the image on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. A little bit of a learning curve, but I'm good with that. Good grief, I've been saying that I'm going to learn how to do thumbnails for a long time. I figure that's actually pretty easy. I just have to take the time to do it. And part of that, the way that's going to assist me is I am off from work for the next 4 days. I took kind of a mini vacation. I told one of my fellow managers today that she asked me, well, what's going on? I'm like, I just want to go away and forget this place for a few days. And that's pretty much the exact truth. So that's kind of where I'm headed with that. So I'm going to spend some time over the next 4 days wrestling with OBS, working on my certification for my other job and that I'm working on. Hopefully I want to have that done by early July at the latest. And so I'm going to work on that as well. Plus, I just want to do some relaxing, just some hanging out. But right away, I want to deal with a few of the channel comments. I usually get, some comments related to certain videos. My video on George Floyd Authority and MLK was greeted with a loved it. Spare email, and I'm assuming based on the 2 comments, this was in relationship to one of my videos, what was it like to be a pastor? He said, he preached a whole sermon. This guy, his name is Pastor Steve Anderson, preached a whole sermon against wearing earrings, claiming it was a sin. He probably feels the same about tattoos. Anybody dressing the opposite of Steve Anderson or Joel Osteen is on right track in my position, in my opinion. Yeah, I agree with that. I think it goes to a deeper issue with religion, and that is religious control. The more aspects or facets of a person's life that a person gives over control to the religious authority, the more control that religious leader actually has over their life. And I think that's probably one of the the things I would walk away from religion with that I know for sure. I really believe that religion is one of the major control mechanisms of politics. And politics uses religion as a control mechanism. So it's not, to me, any more unusual to say that than to point out that, sometimes people do crazy things for crazy reasons. So there's that kind of issue. I'm also well aware that, in my case, what was it like to be a pastor? When I look at dress and I look at the way things have gone, people ask me, what are you going to do in relation to those things? Well, I already do a few things. Like, I wear stuff that is as far away from Christianity as far as symbols as I can get. And that's not to piss anybody off. It's just I'm different now. I go different directions. So, symbolism, people ask me, do you ever plan to get, I've never gotten a tattoo, but I have it on my list, my bucket list. So once things open up again and the tattoo parlors are allowed to go, I'm actually actively considering it, except I think they're going to be busy for a while. So I may have to wait for a few months. And it might be one of the first things I do when I get to my new job as kind of a celebration of getting to the new job. So we'll see what happens there. In relation to week 10, where I talked about, and this is how long COVID-19 has been going. I talked about COVID-19 way back in week 10 when I talked about it being an act of God. And the same guy, spare email, kind of said, hey, my grandmother kind of, her church claimed that COVID-19 was an act of God sent to punish people. I think it's for homosexuality, didn't he say? Yeah, same-sex legislation in the UK. If I had a nickel for every time some plague or disaster was punishment for homosexual sexual behavior in the church, I could probably take myself out to a pretty damn good cup of coffee at Starbucks. I don't get where that comes from. I mean, there's a certain morality in religion that develops, and people just kind of, it's good training if you want to objectify other people simply because they don't believe the same as you do. If you want to treat another human being as less than a human being, one of the best ways to train that up in a person is make them religious. Probably the easiest one is homosexuality. I'm sorry, I just don't have that viewpoint anymore. And that's what usually I say when Christians ask me what my view on homosexuality is anymore. And I'm like, what 2, 3, 5, 12 people do in their bedroom is none of my damn business as long as it's consensual and they're emotionally mature enough to handle it. It's not my business to tell people who they can love. I don't get how people think that you got to control and channel things. And so COVID-19 being an act of God is kind of vengeance for that. Well, I'm going to tell you something. It's a pretty sucky, lousy thing because it doesn't, as far as I can tell, it isn't like exclusively killing homosexuals. It isn't, if it was a judgment from God against same-sex marriage in the UK, I have a question then. Why isn't it killing the legislatures that passed those laws, and why isn't it killing the homosexuals exclusively? It's killing elderly people, many of whom are Christians. Maybe it's the wrath of Satan. That would make more sense, but quite frankly, I think it's just a natural disease, and we as human beings are still very susceptible to those. We still work at it, but we have a lot of means at our disposal now, so that's one of the positives. A week ago, somebody commented on my deconversion story again. This is JMG94J, about a week ago. He says, once you decide that you want to do a critical examination of your beliefs, your faith is doomed. It all collapses very, very quickly. I have to make a couple comments about my deconversion story. One, it's still the most popular video on this channel, and it's actually getting to be ridiculously popular at sometimes. A lot of people watch it. not very many people react to it. So when somebody comments about it, I know I have to thank them for taking the time, but I couldn't agree with you more. I think the real problem with faith is at some point in your challenging of your faith, you're going to realize that faith itself, in itself, is dishonest. It is attempting to believe in something that you can't prove. And you can fit a lot of things in that idea. I believe in the universe of Harry Potter being true. And as much as I want to believe that, it's not true. Truth, I think the best definition I've ever heard of truth has been very recently. It's that which conforms to reality and has predictive power. That's a definition from Apologia, which I'll link. One of his latest videos, I think he's been talking about how the apostles are not good evidence. Their martyrdom isn't good evidence for the resurrection because you can straight up eliminate most of them. And the few that you can eliminate are questionable. So he's been doing that work. So I'll link his latest video up there as a favorite hymn because I've always found him very enjoyable. So yeah, the real thing with deconversion and faith is once you begin to examine the claims on which your faith is based and realize that a lot of it's imagination, a lot of it can't be historically verified, and a lot of it is just taken blindly as true. A lot of times people hold on to their faith simply because of somebody very near and dear to them being the one that taught them how to do it. It has no intellectual assent. You're just kind of doing whatever. And I think that's the real problem. Once you realize that about your faith, a lot of people have a hard time at that moment of deconversion. They either take the blind leap of faith and continue to believe, or they realize that belief in and of itself, faith in and of itself, is a dishonest position to take. It's not a virtue. People ask me, what virtues I used to hold as Christianity when I was a Christian and that I no longer hold their virtues today. The first is faith and the second is obedience. Obedience is not a virtue because you're just submitting your will to somebody else. That can be a good thing. That can be a bad thing. It's completely virtue neutral. It's not really a virtue. It means that you do something because somebody told you to. And, whether that's the guy holding the button on the gas chamber that gases Jews, or whether that's somebody that tells you to go out and feed the poor, doesn't really make a difference. From an ethical standpoint, you're just doing what you're told. And there's nothing good from doing just what you're told. So that's kind of where I stand with that. So you're definitely right. I appreciate the comment. Thank you. In week 18, I did Should Christians Be Taxed? And Keith McIntyre posted this, and I think, my position, and I'm going to read it. My position is not that churches shouldn't have nonprofits, but that they should be treated like all other nonprofits. That they should file the same nonprofit tax forms and let their books be open to the public like other nonprofits have to. Wouldn't that increase the information people are having when examining religion in churches? I think that the government should have a say in what churches do with their money, but church members should. If I wanted to give money to a church, but I agreed with what they had to say to do with the money, I would, of course, see 80% of the money went to buying the preacher a mansion. I might think twice. That's actually a very good point. And a lot of people have made that point and from an issue of transparency, a lot of people get really, defensive about that. Christian leaders get really defensive about this issue. And I agree with you, Keith. I think the one thing that really needs to be stated is that if you're going to have a nonprofit status for churches so they're not taxed, okay, and I don't want churches taxed because the moment you tax religious organizations, they're going to beef. They're going to say, you're taking my goddamn money. You better allow me to tell you what to do with that money. Otherwise, you're just stealing it. Okay, you're not taking it from me in taxation. Now, as a libertarian, I would argue that all taxation is theft. It's just some theft we put up with. But it doesn't change the facts that This is happening. If you're going to say that these are nonprofits and tax exempt, like all nonprofits, yes, they should disclose their financial information. They should be required to disclose that information. And I'm going to tell you, the resistance level shouldn't be there. I've had Christians reject that, and I said, and my immediate response is usually something like this: why? What do you got to hide? And it's exactly what you say. Okay, even my small little church, I think our budget was like $40,000 to $45,000 a year. When you looked at what that went to, it went to me, my organist, and my pianist for a lot of years. And then the rest went to keep the lights on. Okay, so the amount of money that was actually spent on the church building and stuff was very minuscule. The vast majority of the money was staff. Okay, and it's, that's just true. Now, in bigger churches, mega churches, yeah, you're going to see a salary line. And I'm not sure that this would completely help that it goes to the pastor in his mansion. What it's going to say is, this is what the pastor draws as a salary. This is what he draws as a housing allowance. If you see that the guy's housing allowance is $500,000 a year, you're like, what the hell is he doing with that? But then if he's got a mansion and his mortgage payments are indeed adding up to $500,000 a year, then yeah, you might want to say, well, holy damn, And I was never against ministers making money when I was a church member. I just felt that, it's like a job like anything else. If you do it really well, you might as well get paid for it. But at the same time, you've got to be able to disclose that honestly. And, if people are rejecting the idea of full disclosure of their money, I know some churches that actually have that in the clause, that the financial transactions have to be posted on the board every month. So the congregation members do know what the money's spent on. It's just most of them just don't bother to find out. And that's kind of where it's at. But I think you make an excellent point. People might, kind of deal with things a little bit differently. All right, I'm going to conclude with one other comment I received, not necessarily the YouTube channel, but related to a lot of things going on. And this also is kind of a reaction to some of the comments I've seen on Facebook lately, because there is certain people that will argue this way. And somebody asked me, how do you avoid being somebody that gets so stuck on a soapbox? First of all, I'm going to tell you, I do get stuck on soapboxes, but what we mean by that is when you make an argument, how is it that you're able to not, do all this stuff? I'm a pretty calm guy and I don't get upset about a lot of things. And people sometimes wonder how that is. I says, because there's a few factors when I argue with somebody that I do, in my head at least, and I don't often realize I do them anymore. And so I had to stop and think about, what do the hell I do? When I'm engaging in an argument, what the hell am I doing? Well, here's one. I'm going to give an example of something I don't do. I saw a post recently, and I'm not going to tell you the subject matter or anything, but it ended with the line, and if you don't agree with me, you're just an X and uneducated. Now, I'm going to tell you something about that kind of argumentation. It's bullshit. Okay? I'm going to straight up call that kind of argumentation bullshit. And I'm going to tell you why. One, it lacks humility. If your argument is really good, that's fine. But if you're not humble enough to acknowledge that your argument might be wrong, then I would say you have a problem. Okay? 2, it's name calling. 3, it's special pleading. You want me to treat your argument as different than anybody else's, which is bullshit. And it's just bad. It also shows insecurity. A good argument does not fear scrutiny. It does not fear pushback. If you really feel your argument is good, you want it to be scrutinized. You want it to be argued against. You want people to attack it and go after it, because then you can refine it. Okay? But if you got to put it out there that anybody who disagrees with me is just an idiot and stupid, this is why I don't have name calling on this channel, because that doesn't prove anything. Just because you claim your argument is unassailable doesn't make it so. Develop the virtue of humility in your life. Because if you develop a little bit of humility, you will face these questions. And when you look at an argument, now the funny thing about this post is I agreed with about 80% of it. Okay. There was a couple of things I disagreed with, but then they ended that way. And I'm like, now I'm going back and scrutinizing the 80% that I agreed with. It backfires on you. It's a lousy, because you're basically treating all the people that are listening to your argument like they're stupid and they don't have any intelligence, and you're the only one that's arrived. It's the height of hubris to make those kind of statements. So, if your argument for something is good, don't be afraid of scrutiny. The other thing I do in argumentation, and this is a recent addition where I'm trying to do this a lot more often, is what's called Steelmanning somebody's argument. In other words, I listen to the argument and then I say, okay, is there any way to make this argument better? In other words, I deliberately try to make the argument better and thus make it stronger. Well, why would you do that? Because one, it avoids the trap of strawmanning somebody, of having them say something, making them say something in my argument that they didn't really say. When you steelman somebody, you actually have to understand the actual argument. And then you have to ask yourself the question, how can I make this stronger? It's a good way to avoid, how shall we say it, arrogance about your own position, because you may find that they actually have a strong position. They might be right about some things. And that's kind of how you have to handle argument. And this is why I have a large problem with religion and political figures, because both of those people have a real cult of personality about them. Religious beliefs, of course, obviously have a cult of personality around whatever religious god is being worshipped. But you also have people that get that way. I think people that idolize and worship Donald Trump are setting themselves up. Basically, no matter what he says, it's right. And, before liberals say, yay, the rabid atheist is agreeing with us, I'd like to point out that a lot of people did that with Obama. A lot of people did that with Bush. A lot of people did that with Clinton. And you go all the way back to George Washington. The point is that there's always going to be people that are so far up the ass of whoever they think is the leader or a good leader that there's just no way to reason with them. Steelmanning avoids you to do that, because you look at the opponents of somebody and say, okay, let's say, in my case as a libertarian, I'm very pro-Second Amendment, but I have steelmanned all the anti-evidence. The argument isn't good, so how do I make it stronger? Oh, this part of the argument is irrelevant. Let's pull that out. What can we put there that would make the argument better? On occasion, and in some ways, I think this is what happened when I finally said, you know what, Christianity is full of shit. Because no matter how much I try to steelman this, there's still a shit ton of flaws. And if an omnipotent, omniscient God wrote this book, for instance, when I'm dealing with the question of the Bible, I shouldn't have to steelman it to make the argument better, because it also already should be flawless. And two, I shouldn't really have to struggle to find answers in something this important. And that's when it all begins to unravel, because no matter how much you steelman the argument, it still has major flaws. And then you're like, yeah, maybe it's not true. So there's that kind of issue. That's kind of the way I look at life. Never hold a position so tightly. I mean, even my atheism, don't hold a position so tightly that new evidence or new ways of thinking might not be able to change it. And that's kind of where I'm going to leave it today, because that's kind of the truth of where I'm at. This has been week 20. I do want to, did pick up a follower this week. Thank you. Keep growing. We're up to 23. I'm not sure where I'm going to be, by the end of the year, but we'll see. But thank you for stopping by, and welcome to my channel once again. As you can see, comments have a way of determining the nature of Friday's videos. I always appreciate those comments. Like, subscribe, do the things that you do. Just once way of reiterating announcements, there's probably going to be more posts coming. I'm looking at some reaction to preacher type videos, and then I'm also looking at continuing my Life of Christ series. plus, of course, Friday videos, and we'll continue to work on those things. But in the meantime, thank you for stopping by, and I appreciate you. Welcome to the channel. Hopefully someday I can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. In the meantime, this is Ed Rabyd, the Rabid Atheist, wishing you a great day. Be safe and just enjoy life.